And we went out there and we go ding dong, ding dong, ding dong, ding dong. And Brad and Janet come out doing their thing. Oh, Brad, wasn't it wonderful? Wasn't Betty Monroe wonderful? And this hail of rice hit the stage.
Hi guys, welcome back to Interval Conversations. We're on season 3 now, and I am so happy to be joined today by the wonderful Mark Turnbull. So Mark, how are you doing?
I'm good, thank you.
Oh, very good.
Locked up.
Locked up, yeah. I've been like this since March. It's so good to have you here. For those who don't know Mark is an actor, director, is a tutor, and I'm so glad to have him here today. So, Mark, how did you first get involved in this wonderful industry? Where did it all begin?
My mum and my dad met on a production of, an amateur production of Oklahoma. And my dad was playing curly, and my mum played in the pit. She played the piano. And they fell in love. They got married, I think, during White Horse Inn, and then I was born during Annie Get Your Gun. And so in our family, singing, music, musicals, though I wasn't really, it wasn't my thing, but musicals were around from as long as I can remember, and being taken to the theatre to watch my dad sing. My dad had a sort of a big Howard Keel voice. And he was a very good-looking guy, blonde hair, blue eyes, and I always played all the romantic leads. And I spent my childhood running around theatres, making a nuisance of myself. Right? So it was quite a natural place to end up. That wasn't the intention. I wanted to be a rock star. I wanted to be Jimi Hendrix in my teens. And then I realized that I wasn't good enough to be a guitar virtuoso. So we were living in Africa at the time. My parents met in what was Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe. And when we came to England in the mid-1970s, I went to a sixth form college called Queen Mary's College in Basingstoke. And there was a guy there called Gareth Thomas, who was an ex-actor. And he ran probably one of the first real college drama departments, where Hampshire County Council had built him a theatre. And we did improvisation classes and we did productions, but he did it like pros, because that's what he knew. And of course, this is long before the days of GCSE drama or anything like that. So basically, he could teach whatever he wanted. So he ran a full crew there. They did something like 3 or 4 major productions a year. I, in the meantime, having come from Africa to England in the mid-70s, coming from a very kind of 1950s public school kind of background where you had to have your hair cut very short and be very conventional, what have you. Of course, immediately flipped out, grew my hair, bought a nice guitar off Denmark Street, and promptly ceased to do any work whatsoever and failed my A-levels. And at that particular moment, Gareth Thomas said to me, "You're quite good at this," because I think I was playing Oberon in a production of The Midsummer Night's Dream for him. And I said, "Well, can you do this for a living?" And he laughed. He said, "Yeah, of course you can." And that was the first time I'd ever considered I might do it for a living. But as everything else was going wrong at the time, and I wasn't going to be Jimi Hendrix, on a whim, literally a whim, I decided that I would become an actor, because I quite liked the idea of it. And on that whim, here we are. That was 1978, 79. So some 40 odd years later, here I am still mucking about on stages and doing things like that. So what he then said was, "Well, if you want to be an actor, you're going to have to go to drama school." And I said, "What's a drama school?" Because I had no idea. He said, "Well, RADA, Central, whatever. They're like the big 10, 8 drama schools." And he said, "You have to audition." And I said, well, what's an audition? He said, well, you have to learn a piece. And he said, you won't get in. He said, you won't get in. Go to university instead. And I didn't fancy going to university because in university they wrote, A, I didn't know what to do. And B, if I was going to do drama, they wrote essays about it. And I was not interested in that. I wanted to do it. So he then was very kind and he arranged for me to have lessons from a woman called Meg Newen, to whom I am eternally grateful, who basically prepped me and prepared me for drama school auditions. And I auditioned for, I don't know, most of the big ones. I was recalled at all bar one and I was offered places by two. So it kind of seemed a good idea. And that's how I trained. And I spent 3 years training at the Webber Douglas Academy, which no longer existed. It was absorbed into Central some years back. And worked and found out that A, I couldn't walk properly, B, I couldn't talk properly, and C, I certainly couldn't act. And they tore us down, stripped us out, and then left us to put ourselves back together again. And that was a preparation for the industry, really, because the industry still to this day is probably, there's a saying, it says, love the industry, but don't expect it to love you back. And that kind of set me up. And I left Webber Douglas and I went into repertory theatre and I tried to be an actor. And I'm still trying, I suppose. Something like that.
But since then, you have played so many iconic roles. Well, you've played Jean Valjean, Frankenfurter, you've done Evita, Chicago. Could you tell us about some of those show experiences? Like, what was it like doing them?
Rocky Horror was an education.
Yeah.
In many, many ways. I'd always liked the show. I saw the film when I was, I don't know, 14, something like that. And you see, I fell into musicals. I had no intention of being in musicals whatsoever. I wanted to be a classical actor. I wanted to be a straight actor. And it was only because when I was at drama school, they realized I had a singing voice and they trained me. That musicals, the thing about the industry is you have to find out where you fit. Where is your niche? What is the thing that you can do that makes you unique or makes you more employable? So when I left drama school, I followed what was in the old days the route which was to go into repertory theatre, which meant that you went to one of the, I mean, in those days, it was the very end of the movement, but there were probably maybe 70 reps around the country. And they all did maybe 3 seasons, 4 seasons a year. They would do music, they would do plays, they would do musicals, and that's where you kind of learned your craft from the older actors. You watched them, you watched the ones who knew what they were doing. And I'd been relatively successful in the first sort of 3-4 years of my time in the business. I mean, the first thing was getting into the business, because in those days you had to have an equity card. It was known as a pre-entry closed shop. You had to have the card to get a job, and in order to get a job, you had to have a card. So I kind of skedaddled around that one, because I managed to get in on what was known as a variety ticket. I got in by singing in a close harmony group, jazz harmony group, and pretending we weren't actors. And that's what got me into the union. Once I had the card, then I could audition properly. So I had been auditioning. So I did some really nice stuff in it. I did lots of plays. I did Rattigan plays. I did Eightborns, all sorts of stuff, and the odd musical. I think I did Jesus Christ Superstar. I did Godspell. But in those days, you did a gig for maybe, I don't know, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 12 weeks, and then you moved on to the next. There was no question of staying in anything for like 2 years, 5 years, the rest of your life. You just wanted to move on constantly, and what you did was you each repertory theatre had its own sort of circuit. There were maybe 4 or 5 reps in the same circuit. So you would go in, and if you worked at one and you did your job, you were a pro. You turned up on time, you knew your lines, you didn't you had humility. You had to, because you were surrounded by all these other actors who knew far, far more than you did. and would, if you made a mess of it, they'd tell you. On the other hand, if you had humility, if you were finding something really, really difficult. I remember doing a play, doing an Acorn play, where I was struggling. I could not get this scene. I could not do it. And one of the older actors, a lovely guy called Lionel Guyot, who was a fabulous actor, wonderful actor, wandered up behind me and gently whispered in my ear and said, "You're trying too hard." And that was, that's how it happened. So I'd found myself doing these shows, and then I'd been at Birmingham Rep, I think, probably one of the world's worst productions of Romeo and Juliet ever done. It was, I won't even go into what a disaster it was. At one point we were all on strike. Because they brought in a load of supernumeraries from the Birmingham Drama School from the fight sequences, who of course weren't equity members, and also probably didn't know how to fight, weren't trained. So we all went on strike, and everybody ran for the hills. It was an awful production. But I finished that, and then I was out of work, as you were. But in those days, if you were out of work, you went to your bank manager who knew you, knew what you looked like, knew what you did, and you said, I'm out of work, I'm signing on, and I need an overdraft. And he'd say, how much do you need? And you say, don't know, a couple £100. Tide me over to my next job. And he would say, yeah, fine, off you go. And that was it. You ran up your overdraft, you got the next job, you earned just enough money to survive, pay for your digs, eat, pay the rent back at home, and then pay off your overdraft, and you started all over again. And that's how it was. Anyway, I used to buy the stage every week. So I bought the stage, and in the stage that week, after we finished at Birmingham Rep, there was an advert saying, Rocky Horror Show, open audition. Now, open auditions in those days were very unusual. Particularly, you couldn't work in the West End unless you had what was known as a blue card. A blue card was an equity card, which meant that you'd done at least 40 weeks in the provinces. You'd worked for 40 weeks. So that meant that most people couldn't work in the West End. They couldn't even audition for the West End, which meant that there was a certain level of quality if you ever got to the West End. And there was this audition. So I went and auditioned. It was at the Kenneth More Theatre in Ilford. And there was this strange-looking little man who looked like Nosferatu, who was the producer and a director called Viv Ellicott, who's a dear friend. And I sang Hot Patootie Bless My Soul, thinking I'd quite like to play Eddie. And then they said to me, can you do a German accent? So I said, well, I can do a sort of Peter Sellers German accent, like a really bad Dr. Strangelove one. So I did. So can you come back this afternoon? So I came back that afternoon. They said, we'd like to hire you. And I went, oh yeah, okay, fine, lovely. And said, play Dr. Scott. I said, that's the bloke in the wheelchair. And they went, yes. Okay, the German. Oh, does it mean I get to play Eddie as well? They went, no, you're not playing Eddie. I went, oh, okay. I wanted to do Hot Patootie Bless My Soul. I really love that rock and roll. Instead of which I get to sing Eddie's Teddy, and I'm a ghoul in the first half. Anyway, I was skint. I needed the money, so I said, yeah, fine. And they offered me 140 quid a week. Now, rep wages in those days was £92 a week. So I thought, oh, I'm doing well here. 50 quid. And it's a 20-week tour. So I rang my agent, who was a wonderful woman called Libby Glenn, who took me out of drama school, who was an American, went to Radha Darling. And I phoned her and said, I've got this job. She said, what? I said, I've got this job at Rocky Horror. She said, oh my God, what are you doing that for? That tired old thing. I said, yeah, but I'm skint. She said, and how long is it for? I said, 21 weeks? You can't go away for 21 weeks. Anyway, she was not pleased with me at all. I thought, well, I'm skint, I need the money. So she said, well, I'll talk to the producer, and we'll see what we can. The money is not what you should be paying on a tour. She phoned me back about an hour later, said, I spoke to that dreadful man, who's the producer. Don't you ever dare work with that man ever again. Otherwise, I will be forced to let you go. Because I didn't get a row with him, because he wouldn't up the money. And the next thing I knew was I was on this tour. And so I was used to doing maybe 3 rehearsals in rep a week. Learn a show in a week. A whole musical.
1 minute.
Okay, fine. We learned it in a week. And then we went to Hanley, which is where our section of the tour was opening. And just before that, I said, who else is in this thing? And there's this lovely guy called Chris Marlowe, who I knew through another friend who's playing Brad. So he took me out. We went to the Arts Theatre Club, which used to be a drinking hall for actors in the West End. And he said, you're going to have an experience like you have never had before. I said, what do you mean? He said, they throw things at us.
Yeah.
I said, they what? He says, they throw things at us, they shout at us, they're absolutely vile. I said, what are you talking about? It's a show. He said, you wait and see. He said, they shout out. It's madness. He said, the ghouls used to go in the audience. We've banned that. They don't go in the audience anymore because Judith there, who was playing Magenta, got her jaw smacked in the jaw by some bloke. So we don't go out there. It's too dangerous now. And so sure enough, we got to Hanley. And all I remember is hearing the opening chords of... No, Nosferatu went on stage and announced that anybody who threw anything or anybody who disrupted the performance would be evicted. And across the front of the stage were 10 bouncers, like ex-coppers who were moonlighting. And there was this roar. I'm not kidding, a roar like I have never heard. And we went out there and we go ding dong, ding dong, ding dong, ding dong. And Brad and Janet come out doing their thing. Oh, Brad, wasn't it wonderful? Wasn't Betty Monroe wonderful? And this hail of rice hit the stage. Packets of the stuff. No, still in the packets, half of it. The next thing I know, we're just ducking. There's just stuff flying through the air. And they shouting at us. They have no time. None of these little things, no little Valier mics to help you. We're working in big theatres. Theatre All Hanley, I think, held 1,200. We're working without mics. We've got handheld mics to sing into. That's it. And we're trying to do dialogue over this riot. Absolute riot. And the ghouls are wandering around the stage, sweeping up. And every time there's a trigger line, they throw confetti, they throw chips, they throw bounty bars, they throw Kit Kats, you name it, they're throwing it. And then, of course, some of them are just there to generally, they're off their faces and just to abuse you and shout abuse at you. Of course, in the show, Janet is called an SELUT and Brad is an ARSE hole. And every time Brad says something, they shout that. And every time Janet says something, they shout that. Anyway, we were in a state of shock. Chris Marlowe had this big smile on his face, like, I told you so. And by the time I came on as Dr. Scott, the first thing I opened my mouth was 20 tons of bog roll hit the stage.
Oh,
and they were shouting Sieg Heil at me. Not just shouting, chanting it. Chanting, see, I felt like it was at the Nuremberg rally. Sieg Heil, Sieg Heil, Sieg Heil, Sieg Heil. I'm like, okay, I haven't got a word out yet. So in absolute terror, I shouted back at them and it gave them a fright because Dr. Scott doesn't normally answer back. And it shut them up for 2 minutes. I thought, okay, I'm onto something here. Every time somebody shouted something at me, I nailed it. And that was the beginning of that tour. It was rock and roll. It was pure rock and roll. We had lots of fans. We were suddenly famous in this world of Rocky Horror because suddenly Rocky Horror had become something else. And we adapted very, very quickly. We learned when to cut to the next number. We learned how to stop them, how to time them. We learned the alternative script they were shouting at us. The weird thing was the further north we got, the better the audiences got. When you got to places like Sheffield, when you got to Manchester, when you got, they were much more cohesive and much more kind of, and loud but very, very warm. It was very much a lot of the time in the south, or places like Birmingham, where they were just running amok. But it was a very, it was a, we learned how to cope with audiences, and we're under fire all the time. So by the time I came back to play Frankenfurter, I mean, this is over a period of time. I was in and out of that show for the best part of, I don't know, 3-4 years. Because I'd leave, I'd get fed up and leave, and I'd have no money. Then I'd have to go back, and they'd offer me another tenner to come back. But by the time I went back to play Frankenfurter, I kind of knew everything that could be done to you. I also realized that Frank doesn't actually have to do very much. Frank is loved by them. And what I didn't do was, I thought Tim Curry was the most defining portrayal of that character. And who am I to muck about with something that works? Now, I was quite fortunate in those days. I kind of looked a bit like him, the hair, when I put the slap on, when I pulled the makeup on, I was very, very slim in those days. I kind of, and vocally was quite similar. So I just thought, well, it's me, but I'm going to do it like him. I'm going to copy what works, and it'll come out and it'll be me.
Yeah.
And that sort of gave me a basis. And that meant that, for example, at the end when he dies, I wanted them to cry. I wanted them to be sad. And I would force the issue. I'd refuse to engage with them. I had to talk to them all through the show, but at that point I would refuse to engage, and I would sing from my heart and get them pretty much most of the time. I mean, you can see it, it's on YouTube.
Yeah.
And I learned how to lead a company. I learned I was surrounded by some brilliant other actors who were not greedy, who were incredibly supportive. We were very much in it together. And all right, we had our ups and downs on and off stage because we were with one another day in, day out. And it was a tough show to do, and it was a long tour. But I learned my craft. They always talked at drama school about finding relaxation on stage. A pro works from a point of relaxation. And I never understood that until after I'd done Rocky, because I knew it so well. One night I found myself saying the same piece of dialogue that I just said because I wasn't concentrating. And Paul Critchlow, the wonderful Paul Critchlow, was riff-raff, turned around and said, "You said that." And I said, "Did I?" And of course the audience then shouted at me, at which point I then went, "Oh, shut up." And then I couldn't remember what my next line was. So I turned around and said, "What comes next?" So they told me, and we carried on.
Yeah.
I learned what it was like to be relaxed on stage and realized that it doesn't matter what happens. You pull them in, you bring them to you. And most of the time they enjoy that, they like that. They want to be pulled in and be part of what you're doing, but you do it for them. You don't do it for yourself. It's not an ego trip. I mean, anyone plays Frank will immediately have an ego trip, I suppose, in some ways, because everybody thinks he's desirable. Walking through an auditorium while they all go potty and having people grabbing at you and having surrounded you a phalanx of 8 bouncers to get you on stage is something that you'll never forget. You know, you're a rock star for the minute, sort of. But no, it was fun and it was great, and I loved every minute of it. And I worked hard. I worked very, very hard. But I learned so much.
Because there are some wonderful clips on YouTube still. Like there's you performing "I'm Going Home," as well as the full final night performance of that Hamlet tour. Yeah,
that was an absolute riot.
So I watched it the other night. I was like, "How are they getting through this? This is just." The audience was just wild.
Oh, they were wonderful, though. They were with us every step of the way. They were completely with us. And the weird thing is that, cut a long story short, I did another production of it in Italy, not long after that. which turned out working for Nosferatu, which turned out to be an illegal tour, which we didn't
Oh,
know,
oh
which
wow.
collapsed, and I walked off.
Oh,
I walked out of it because he didn't pay us. Half the cast at one point ended up being stranded in Italy. But I then found myself working on the one in the West End that replaced the one I was on tour with, which was, the thing is, and this is where it starts getting mildly contentious, is that Richard O'Brien absolutely hated that production that we did. Absolutely loathed it with a passion. Didn't stop him coming. Didn't stop him pitching up at Wimbledon and taking the glory as the second coming when he walked on stage at the end, and then kindly announced that that was the best production of Hedda Gabler I've ever seen, which I thought was a bit mean, because But then, on the other hand, I mean, I got to know Richard when I was doing it in town, and I don't think he necessarily meant to be mean. I think he didn't really understand what he'd created. And because it wasn't what he'd had in his head in the first place, or what it was, this thing that mutated, that had absolutely nothing to do with him, but suddenly became a massive money spinner again. Because you have to remember, Rocky was dead and buried. It had run it did a limited run in the West End. It had been on the King's Road, and it was dead. It was absolutely dead. It had no more life in it. It was the odd rep production, but that was it. And, I think they pulled us off the road. They made us come off the road. They kept us out of town. They wouldn't let us go into town. They blocked it because he wanted it back. The bizarre thing is that when I went into it in town, which was not something that was planned, and it was only because they were in dire straits in town that I ended up in that production at all. Because I wasn't a name, I was a name in the world of Rocky Horror, but I certainly wasn't a name in the West End. I mean, I'm still not a name in the West End. They cast with people who basically were telly people, and the guy playing Frank, unfortunately, couldn't sing, and he lost his voice a week in, and that's when the proverbial hit the proverbial. So then I'd come back from Italy, and with no money, 2 small children to support, a wife who'd had me away for a long time, no money in my pocket whatsoever. And this phone call came and said, "Can you get your bum to the Piccadilly Theatre?" And ASAP. It was a Friday afternoon. And I said, "What for?" And I said, "Oh, it's for the Rocky Horror Show." And I laughed. I went, "Really?" I thought none of us were allowed within a mile of West End production. And I went down there and was met at the stage door by the company manager, who took me on stage, and I walked straight into Richard and the director, Robin Lefebvre, and the 2 producers, who said, "Can you do Sweet Transvestite? I'm going home. Thank you very much. Go and sit in the pub next door." Came to the pub 10 minutes later and said, "We've just done a deal with your agent. You start now." I went, "Okay. I haven't got any costumes. I haven't got any frocks. Don't worry about that. Richard's playing Frank for the weekend." So I thought, "Oh, this is fun." I said, "Okay, I'm in." So I wandered around the front of the Piccadilly, and I sat in the stalls, and I watched an audience who'd come to see the Rocky Horror Show as the one that I was last in, prepared to throw stuff, being searched, being forced to sit down, big notices up at the side saying the narrator is not boring. Doing all the trigger lines have been taken out of the script, doing absolutely everything to stop them. Behave yourselves. How dare you? We're doing theatre here. Watching Richard playing Frank, which was very, very interesting, because he brought all his own costumes, and was brilliant as Richard. Not sure how brilliant he was as Frank, but it didn't really matter, because Richard is God when it comes to this. Richard is the one, whatever. He doesn't matter what, he just stand there. And Robin Lefebvre said to me, watch the blocking. I was sitting there trying to work out what blocking he's doing. And I realized after performance 2, he's not doing the same thing at any one point. He hasn't got a clue. He's wandering around the stage. They're pushing him about. He's just wandering, and the rest of them are adapting fast. Uh, so actually, my 4 shows was an absolute waste of time. I might as well gone home and sat there watching them. And I came in on Monday morning, and they gave me, I think I did 2 hours with Stu Hopps, who's the choreographer, 2 hours with Robin Lefebvre, something like that. And they'd made me costumes over the weekend. And I think I was on that night with a cast I'd never met, a cast I'd never rehearsed with. I did it all with the company manager, and I just walked out there and sort of did it. I upset Sue Blaine, which I'm very sorry for, but I hated the new costumes. They gave me an identical set to the one the guy played to what Tim was wearing, and I thought they were horrible. They were so fussy. So I just took a pair of scissors and started hacking bits off them. It had sort of a hat thing for the floor show, like Zebedee. So I refused. I didn't wear that. Threw that away. And they had me some. They had made a set of platform boots, platform heels, like Tim Curry was in the film. But I'd never worked in this. I'd always worked in 4-inch stilettos, 4.5-inch stilettos, and I still had a pair from the last time I played it. So I said, no, I'm not wearing those. So they were not happy about that. And so I wore that. I wore my own shoes. And yeah, didn't rehearse with the band. What a band. Oh, what a band. Huh. Wonderful guy called Clem Catini, the drummer. Used to be in the Tornadoes, played all the Joe Meek records, you name it. Clem had been played on a million hits in the 60s and the 70s. What a drummer. And yeah, and that's how I ended up in it in town. So I used to go to the theatre and see if he was on or if he wasn't. And most of the time he wasn't. So a lot of the time he wasn't. So I'd go on and I'd do it. So then the strange thing started happening is that people started phoning theatre and saying, is he on or is Mark on? And so people would kind of, well, it was very, I mean, I spent a year there. The first 6 months were fun. The second 6 months were deathly boring because the first man left and they replaced him with the wonderful Anthony Head, who, lovely guy, great actor, good singer. He could do it. They didn't need me anymore, so I retired to the wardrobe and drank vodka and orange for most of the next 6 months. Except for, I think, for the night when one of his daughters was born. Yeah, taught me a lot about the business that year as to when your star is in the ascendant and when you are the man who's needed and the man who saves the show, and then when you're suddenly very, very irrelevant. And then they offered me the tour after that. But they said, we hired Peter Blake to come back and play Frank. And I said, no, thank you. I don't fancy going out doing it again, covering Peter Blake. So that was it. So I thought. But it wasn't. It came back again. Got me to Africa, bizarrely. Because that's how I ended up going to Africa to play it in Harare. So Frank followed me around for a few years, about a decade, or I don't know how many 100 performances. But yeah, it was a great role to play. Lovely role to play.
Moving off Rocky Horror, do you have any personal highlights from other roles? So I know you understudied John Valjean, you've done Billy the Musical, How to Succeed. What personal highlights?
Well, the Jean Valjean was a strange one because, again, I happened to be in it at a time when the Valjeans were less present. So if you're looking at the 2 years I spent in Les Mis at the Palace, I played Jean Valjean, I think, over 200 times. And the times I would go on for a month. And at one point, I actually rehearsed in a completely new company as Jean Valjean, because they were bringing Valjeans from America. They had a surplus of them at the time, and Cameron needed, and this is where you learn about how the business works. They needed, in those days, it was a quid pro quo. If an American came to Britain, or Britain went to Broadway, they had to send one either way. So Cameron was doing a lot of stuff on Broadway, so they needed American actors to come here. And they had, at that point, I think, 5 companies of Les Mis in the States. and therefore Valjeans were in abundant supply, so they kept sending them over. And when they weren't here, I would do it. And then they'd usually arrive and find that they had to do 8 shows a week, which they never did on Broadway. They only did 6. So they would suddenly say, hang on, I don't want to do 8 shows a week. I couldn't possibly do 8. We all do 8 shows a week here. So I would end up doing 2 shows a week on that. So I actually played Valjean more times than a lot of people who've actually supposedly had the role. Having said that, I learned that to be a good cover is very valuable for a management, but is not exactly great for an actor, because you're terribly, terribly useful. And when you're terribly, terribly useful, they quite like to keep you being terribly useful. So very often you have to leave in order to come back. And I left, and I never came back. I went to Africa instead.
Yeah.
So it's a weird feeling. I was known at the time as the invisible Valjean, because I was there but I wasn't, kind of thing. Looking back at myself again, I was in my 30s. I was incredibly ambitious. I had a young family. I felt as if I was going places. I was climbing the ladder, and I got terribly, terribly frustrated. And I probably didn't do myself many favors in some ways. I didn't have, until Hugh Jackman, Valjeans were built like brick houses. That was how they were cast, and I wasn't like that. And nothing that I did could make me like that. So therefore, I wasn't actually really quite right for it. I could sing it, and I could play it, and I could be very convincing in it, but I wasn't their image. After Hugh Jackman played it in the film, things changed. Suddenly, if you look at the Valjeans of now, they're a hell of a lot prettier.
Yeah. Like if you look at Alfie Boe is known as Two-Show Beau in the West End. One of my friends who did Les Mis, Alfie Boe's known as Two-Show Beau. That's all he does in a week.
Yeah, well, he comes from the world of opera. They only sing 3 times a week. And I'm not a huge fan of. I personally feel Les Mis should have been shut down many, many, many years ago. I feel it's become a pale imitation of what it was. And I say that not out of bitterness, more out of sadness. I think it's lost its way. I think that it has become a product, a brand, and there's actually, and that doesn't mean that there aren't good people in it. I mean, I've just worked with a load of younger actors when I've just done Phantom, who are all kind of in their 30s and what have you, and a couple of them were in it at the time. But their relationship with that show and their experiences with that show are very, very, very different to what I had on that show. We worked very, very hard, and I barely saw my kids. We rehearsed. You were in that theatre every day, virtually from 11 in the morning till, I used to get home at 20 to 1 in the morning. And it's a big thing. But the West End is very different from what it was then. I mean, I struggled. I wanted to leave after a year. I'd had enough. I wanted to move on, because that's what you did. You didn't stay in shows for a long time. I find it inconceivable now that people stay in shows for 7 years, 8 years. How on earth they stay sane is beyond me, and how I don't think it's good for a show particularly. I think it loses its, and when a show is that far down the line, there's no connection with what happened before. It's a memory. So no, I'm sort of, I love the 10th anniversary at the Albert Hall. I enjoyed doing that. The 25th, I was more happy to see my mates than actually. I didn't feel particularly a part of anything. Though I must say, in the afternoon before the so-called principals, arrived, when I was in the choir, so I was way, way up the top, and I think there were, 200 of us, 250 of us. The creme de la creme of the West End from the last 20 years were up there, being in the choir. And at one point, the conductor turned up and said, they're late, they haven't arrived, we need to work this thing for the orchestra. Have we got any valjeans? Have we got any cosettes? Have we got any? We'd like to play through some of the stuff, and would you mind singing? And glorious voices, beautiful voices, still, you know, people like Phil Cavell, who superb valjean, was up there. Loads of people, I mean, who of different generations. I mean, that was remarkable. And when we all sang, "Do you hear the people sing?" completely together, that was a moment that I'll never forget. It was magic. It was. I was very, very lucky and very privileged to be in town in the West End in certain shows, particularly that one, where I think the quality of the performer. In those days, West End names were qualified for, they hadn't been on reality TV, they weren't a commercial thing. They were there because they could do the gig and they could do the job. My time in Les Mis, a second cover was somebody you would want to watch. People got excited when the second covers went on because they were still stunning. I don't know if it's like that now. I suspect perhaps not. I think the business has been, in some ways, and it's probably an old man talking, but the business has been watered down in some ways. And I don't think they're as well trained now as we were then. And they don't have, it's really difficult. How on earth do kids, there's been an explosion of musical theatre schools, an explosion of musical theatre graduates, all scrabbling around. Where do they get the experience? Where do they learn their chops? And they go into town straight away. Yeah. You know, they haven't done 40 weeks in the provinces. They haven't learned their craft. So therefore, they're not, it was a golden age. Now, that's an old man talking. It would be, I suppose. I'm sure there are plenty of youngsters who'll shoot you down and say, "Shut up. You had your time now. Get lost."
Moving off your acting career, you are a director and tutor as well. So could you tell us a bit about your directing experience and your teaching methods?
As I started directing not long after I went to drama school, it was always a second string and something I did in between acting. When I went to Africa, I had a theatre which was owned by a very rich man who liked musicals, and he said, "Come to Africa and put on shows." So I did for 5 years. I was working with trained professionals, semi-professionals, amateurs, doing musicals mainly. But I also had a day job in a boys' college, a Catholic Jesuit boys' college in the mornings, where I was the drama teacher. God knows why they hired me. So I kind of, if you've ever taught 30 boys drama who don't want to be there, you learn pretty quickly what works. And Africa was, Zimbabwe was, I mean, I was born there, so I kind of had a connection. But I was doing all sorts of stuff. I mean, I was going out. I was a consultant for the Ministry of Culture, Education and Culture, which meant having a hand in doing workshops for indigenous artists, where you would go out in the high-density suburbs, as they're called, places that are similar to places like Soweto, where basically the community centre is a cowshed without walls, and it's got 10,000 inhabitants, and the locals there who would like to be actors or want something to do in order to earn money, and do an improvisation workshop for a morning or a day with 20 people, and the township turns up to watch because there's nothing else going on. And you soon learn what works and what doesn't. Being the only man, the only person there perhaps who was white, also made it very, very interesting. because I was instantly obvious in that way. And you're dealing with cultures that are not your own. So you're trying to transpose skills, trying to find out what is universal about what we do. And that was a great education for me. I learned constantly if you have an audience who don't go to the theatre, who don't know what the theatre is in our terms, but if they laugh at something, it's funny. If they're moved by something, it's moving. If it's crap, they tell you. So that was an experience. Anyway, Zimbabwe came to an end very quickly after 5.5 years, because basically the country disintegrated. I don't know if you know anything about Robert Mugabe, but that kind of made it unsafe to be there any longer. So we came back to England, and in that time, I suddenly realized I had, again, a young family, three kids. We had nowhere to live, we had no money. I had to do something, and I couldn't go back into the theatre. So my teaching experience over that period of time meant that I again bought the stage, answered an ad, and started teaching for Italia Conti, which pretty much turned into not a full-time job, but certainly 3-4 days a week. And I ran a youth theatre as well out in Wokingham. So I was teaching all age groups. The Italia Conti thing was youngsters who were in some juniors, but also on the musical theatre strand itself. And therefore I was preparing people for the profession. And I mean, I'm proud to say that a lot of my ex-students are in the profession and are doing extremely well and great, are in West End stages and all over the place. And I'm also proud to say a lot of them who I trained are not, who have lives, who gained something from that training and gained something from who found out a lot about themselves during that period of time. There's a wonderful book called The Invisible Actor by a Japanese actor called Yoshi Aida, who was one of Peter Brook's company in Paris. It is an astounding book about acting because he was a Japanese no theatre actor who was brought into a Western sphere. And he says, in your 20s, you have beauty because you are young. In your 30s, you have no wisdom. In your 30s, you've learned some technique, you have some wisdom, but you're still beautiful. By the time you're in your 40s, if you haven't made it to the front ranks, you should teach. That's exactly what happened to me. I read this book and I laughed like a drain on a bus because I knew that he'd hit upon something there. But I don't view training when I was trained, it was you could kind of trace your training all the way back to Shakespeare. And you say, well, how can you do that? Because every generation of actors had learned from the previous, from the previous, from the previous, from the previous. And to me, that made sense. Craft is passed down. And that's kind of what Yoshi Aida talks about. And therefore, I've never had an original thought in my head about acting. I'm not that clever. I'm a marvelous magpie. I steal anything I like. I steal anything that works. And that, as a director, I'm exactly the same. I'm not interested in concepts. I find most directors do talk concepts. You can't act a concept. So one indulges them and tries to work out what on earth they're trying to do. There are some directors who have concepts who are brilliant, like Peter Brook, but they are few and far between. Most of us are journeymen. And what we're actually trying to do is produce something that the public might like to watch and might like to pay for. And he who pays the piper calls the tune. So when you're passing on those skills, I think it's a quite personal thing. It's quite, you're kind of accumulating. Part of the problems with training, I think, is that it has become monopolized by degrees. We should never have had degrees. Now, I will get shot down in flames, but I think, and I mean, I'm still training to this day. I teach for I don't work at Conti's any longer, but I mean, I've worked for kind of other drama schools, very good drama schools. But the moment you have to get a degree, the moment you have to have a master's degree, the moment you have to write essays, the moment you have to diarize your reflections and all sorts of things, it's lost the plot. Every moment you're on a stage, every moment you're with another actor, you're reflecting upon what you're doing. You don't need to write it down. It makes it all, and therefore things have to be a certain way. And I fought this all my time when I was certainly when I was teaching a lot. I write lesson plans because you have to. I've never followed one in my life. I walk into a room, I see what's in front of me, they do something. If I'm bored, I change it. If I think they're bored, I change it. And they give me the clues as to what I have in the armory of what's in my head, of what works. I look at how their bodies are reacting. I look at how their minds are working. I look at their personalities. I look for their strengths. I look for the things that make them individuals. I look for the things that might excite you if you watch them, if you listen to them. And that makes them interesting. Don't be truthful, be interesting. Because really what we do, there's nothing truthful about it. Again, people shoot me down, but I honestly believe there is nothing truthful about it. It is all artifice, hence the word art. When you know when you go to a theatre, when you watch a show, you know it is people saying lines that somebody else has said, somebody else has written, somebody else has composed. You know they are not the people. You know they are doing it for you. You are not looking at a slice of life. You are not looking into their world. None of that is true. And they know when you're on stage, I know they are out there. And I listen to them and I play to I listen to them breathe, I listen to them laugh, I listen to them when they rustle papers, I know when they're bored. It is my job to stop them from being bored. And if I don't stop them from being bored, I am failing in my job. It is a job, it is a work. There are very few of us who are brilliant. There are very few of us who are geniuses at what we do. The word is, we do some things well, we do some things badly. I can tell you performances, things I've done that I'm not very good in. My wife will tell you what I've not been very good in. I might be inadequate, but I wasn't as good as I thought I should be or what I ever wanted to be. My granddaughter, for some strange reason, likes Les Miserables. She watched the film. She's 6 years old. She came in the other day and she says, Granny says that you were in this. Granny says that you were Jean Valjean. I'm astounded the child even knows. She's watched the whole movie. She knows a lot of the songs because I heard her singing Castle on a Cloud. And I'm thinking, how does this child know this? Anyway, so I got all excited. I thought, okay, fine. Let's show you Grandpa doing it. So I put on this little bit of film. She looked at it. She looked at me. She went, no, can I watch the film, please? And she wanted Hugh Jackman. That's who Valjean is, not your grandpa. Deflated me somewhat. You're only as good as the last performance you did. You're only as... So, I'm probably a dinosaur, but I make no apologies.
Definitely not.
And I can talk the hind leg off a donkey, as you can see.
Well, with all the experience you've got and what you just said, you know your craft, and that's what's worth it. You're passing your knowledge on to the next generation, and that's the least you can do. It's absolutely brilliant. But having said that, I do have one last question for you. I know you hinted at some stuff, but do you have any advice for anyone wanting to get into this industry once it's safe?
Realize that if you do this as a job, you're going to spend most of your life doing other things. Realize if you can cope with that, if you can make a plan in order to do that, you may be lucky. We all have periods where perhaps we're lucky, where things fall into place, but it's sometimes a shock, particularly if you're successful young, to suddenly run into a brick wall and suddenly find there's nothing there. And it's the thing is, you can't take it personally. It's not necessarily anything that you've done or you haven't done. Your casting has changed. You are in the wrong place at the wrong time. And you have to have a resilience. I mean, I've been doing this now for, I don't even know how many years. I started in 1982. So how many years is that? That's almost 39 years.
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah. I'm still here. I'm still working. But I don't know if the last job I did is going to be the last one. You don't know. You have to live with that. And you have to, I always say to any of my students, I say, you must live your life. You must live your life. Oh, I can't imagine my life without this. Well, you should. You have to, don't want to do it. People who want to do it, you're wasting your time. There's no point. Be an amateur. Amateurs are brilliant. And there are brilliant amateur companies. I know, I've directed one over the last couple of years. I've done large-scale musicals at the Cambridge Arts Theatre for the Cambridge Operatic Society. I get to direct quality actors who pay, and they pay me very well. And a 28-piece orchestra, and the best costumes and the best sets. And I have huge admiration for the amateurs who produce really, really, really good work, who do it for love, who do it for pleasure. You don't have to be a professional. If you want to be a professional, realize that you are not in control of your life. You are not in control of your career. People say, oh, I need an agent, I need this, that. Yes, you need all of those things. You need to know how the business works. You need to have, need a phenomenal amount of luck. You also have to have phenomenal resilience. And therefore, if you need to do it, in other words, nothing else will do. And the other thing you also have to realize is that within the business, you will have several careers. It's something I never realized. I never thought after, I mean, I was an actor for 20 odd years. I went away. I didn't act for 10 years. I was involved in the business. I was training people, what have you, directing. It was only by sheer chance and sheer coincidence that I suddenly found myself back on stage. I never imagined that I would go back on stage, and suddenly there was this whole new path as an actor, not as a leading actor, as a character actor, as the old fogey in the corner. The one, someone says, will you do this? I say, well, has it got a good song and a couple of nice scenes? And they say, yeah, so fine, I'm in. I'll do that. Is it paid? I don't necessarily do it. It has to be paid, but I don't necessarily just do it for the money. I'm not really concerned. I've done some wonderful, wonderful shows at the Union Theatre in Southwark. Some of the best musical theatre I've ever been in has been in an 80-seat theatre, working with some wonderful other actors. I went into The Baker's Wife for Michael Strassen. The first day I walked in, the first show I'd done as an actor for 10 years. And I suddenly found 3 people in it who I'd worked with before when I was younger, which was marvellous. And then one of my nieces, because I played the Marquis, I'd trained. She said, it was like acting with your dad. A new path, totally. So you can go away, you can come back. You know, the business will always be here. And that's why I'm sort of kind of people scratching my head when people are going, oh, with the COVID thing, the business will be destroyed. There'll be nothing left. We're going to use generations. No, you're wrong. The business will survive. The theatre will be there. We may not be there, but the theatre will be there. And if you want to do it, if you really, 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 really think that you want to do it, and you need to do it, it will be there for you to do. I don't know exactly what. It will be there. It's survived thousands of years. And producers come, producers go. Businesses come, businesses go. It will still be there. People will always want to be entertained. People will always want to be moved. People will want to cry. They'll want to laugh. There is nothing to replace what we do. The thing that you have to realize, I suppose, as a modern actor, is that 85% of your work will be in front of a camera, will not be in a theatre. And if you're really looking to, and now it's becoming international, you know, British actors all going over to the States, Netflix, all that, that's how it's changed. and you're more likely to audition for somebody in front of doing a piece to camera, that you record yourself, that you send off, rather than being in a room with somebody, which is something I've had to learn. I've had to adapt. I've had to learn how to do that. But you know, it will always be there. And this is a blip. It may not feel like it at the moment. And God knows, I haven't set foot outside my front door now since March, virtually. But I know deep down, I'm not taking anything away from people who are trying to do stuff, who are trying to keep it breathing and all that sort of thing. I understand that. But the panic, I think, is unnecessary. It will come back, it will come back, and it will come back in whatever form, however it decides to come back. So if you want to do it, and if you're a young person and you are, well, do it. You'll find out. And if it doesn't work out, it doesn't matter. It really doesn't. It's part of your life. It's part of who you are. It's part of your existence on this planet. And it doesn't matter whether you're doing a show. There's one thing I learned in Africa. Working for 800 people in the theatre in Harare is no different than working for 1,500 people in the West End. It's the same thing. It doesn't matter where it is, and all this sort of stuff about West End and touring. And it's the people in front of you at that moment. You're only as good as your last performance. And the other thing you have to realize, it's ephemeral. It comes and it goes. When I'm gone, there'll be a few bits of me left lying around, perhaps, and then maybe somebody like your mum who might remember I was actually quite good at something once upon a time, and I'm in her memory. But most of us, we're here and we're gone.
Honestly, that was some absolutely brilliant advice right there. Mark, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been an absolute pleasure. And thank you guys for tuning in to another episode of Interval Conversations.